Okay, you guys have done it. You guys have made me take apart the Casio PX-S3000. In my previous video that I made of this instrument, I said that if enough people were interested, I would take apart the PX-S3000 and see what's going on inside with the action. That video now has over 600 comments, and the vast majority of those are saying something along the lines of, take it apart. So in this video, that is what I'm going to be doing, but first I wanted to address a couple of things regarding this instrument that I really didn't mention in my previous videos regarding it. And the first one of those is a famous quote made by a famous architect, and that quote is, "Form follows function." Now, in the past, I've read a lot about this particular architect, and if you let me know what your favorite work of theirs is. I have a couple that I really appreciate, but let me know what yours are as well. But back to the PX-S3000 and form follows function. For those of you who don't know what that means, basically it's saying that the appearance of something isn't as important as the way it works. The function of something is far more important than its visual appearance, and that is not something that Casio went with here. Casio has gone with a very, very small form factor, and they paid a lot of attention to the form of this instrument, the shape of it, the size of it, the design of it, but the function of it wasn't as important to them. They made a lot of sacrifices with the action simply because to them having the world's most compact digital piano was apparently their holy grail. Other digital pianos still manage to look very nice and not be as compact. For example, the ES8, if you look at it, it's easily it's a lot deeper than the PXS, but yet it still looks really great, and in fact the top to bottom height is actually pretty respectable. So it's still possible to have a slim, attractive digital piano that doesn't have as many sacrifices with the action. So clearly Casio didn't really follow form follows function. They instead went with like function follows form, so the other way around. So that is just something that I wanted to briefly touch on here, that form follows function is a really, really important thing to note. They designed the case first, really, and then designed the action to fit in it and do as best as it could, and it is doing as best as it can, but that isn't very good. The other thing that I wanted to touch on that a lot of people seem to be harping on lately is that the issues that I've mentioned with the PX-S3000 and its little brother, the 1000, are only noticeable by a real concert pianist, then that a beginning pianist wouldn't actually notice it, and this isn't true either. For example, if you were a beginning pianist, one of the things that you might start studying first, well, there's a couple of things. First of all, you might want to start learning the piano just so you can learn your favorite pop song on the piano, or perhaps you might start learning the piano and decide to learn the basics of theory, scales, and chords. Whichever approach you take. For example, many pop songs are in simple keys, and one of those keys is A major. So if you wanted to play an A major chord, whether it's because it's from your favorite pop song or because you've been practicing theory and you've made it around to A major by now, if you wanted to take an A major chord and simply play it back and forth, A, C sharp, E, C sharp, A, and do that as quietly as you possibly can, you'll notice, if you have one of these at home, I want you to go try this out, and if you try to do that as quietly as you possibly can and do it at a reasonable tempo, maybe about like what I'm doing right here, the A C for E, do 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 do, but play it very, very quietly, you'll notice that it's very, very difficult to get the timing to be accurate. You can also do this with D major and E major as well, and I think a couple of others as well. I think F sharp minor is also a pretty good one to do that with as well. So even very simple things like playing an A major chord, playing a D major chord, and just playing the notes back and forth, just like you'd find in many pop songs, is actually quite difficult to do. Now, you can cheat and turn the volume down and play the notes louder, and then you won't have that issue, but if you're trying to play it like you would a real piano, play it expressively and get dynamics out of it, which is literally in the name pianoforte, soft and loud, you'll find that to be difficult to do on the PX-S3000. With that out of the way, let's go take it apart and see what lies inside of this instrument. I'm really curious to see what's happening. I think I know what many of the issues will be, but let's take a look inside and see for ourselves. So here we are at the workshop here at Milan Recording Studios, and we've got the PX-S3000 on the workbench. As usual, with basically everything we work on here at the studio, we've put some padding on the bench to keep it nice and safe. That's not terribly important with this instrument for me, but it's the standard procedure we do here at the studio. I would like to be able to reassemble it at the end of the day, so I will do my best to keep the disassembly process as clean as possible. The first thing we're going to need to do to take this instrument apart is to take out all of the screws on the underside. If I flip this over, you will see them all. There they all are, and we will have to do that. I'm going to do that with a screwdriver. I think some of the people in my comment section made jokes about taking it apart with a Sawzall, but that's not what we're going to be doing here. We will be using a screwdriver. One thing I failed to mention in all of my other review videos of this instrument that I actually do like about this is that you can actually run it off of AA batteries here. Let me see if I can get the door off with one hand. There we go. You can actually put 6 AA batteries into it and run it off of batteries at least for an hour or so. I think the burn time is said to be a bit more than that, though. But that is actually a nice feature of this instrument that I do have to say that I do actually like. But regardless, let's take out all of the screws here of the PX-S3000, and I'll do that off camera so as to not waste your time, and then when those are all gone, I'll come back to you and we'll see what the next step is. So as you can see, we have now taken the key bed of the Casio out of the body of the instrument. And I'm actually really impressed to say that the build quality and the disassembly process of the Casio PX-S3000 is actually excellent. It really came apart beautifully. I didn't run into any major issues other than figuring out how something came apart. And once I figured out how it came apart beautifully. It honestly feels like an instrument that somebody, if something had gone wrong with it, somebody could actually, for example, let's say it fell and it broke a key, right? Let's say something bad happened, it fell down a flight of stairs and 3 of the keys got sheared off. It wouldn't be difficult for some just average person to buy some replacement keys online, go in here and actually replace them themselves. It feels like something that you can take apart and put back together without anything going wrong. So I'm actually very impressed with the build quality and design of the instrument apart from the action, which I'll get into later. But other than that, like the way the cables connect and the way the screws come apart, it's actually pretty impressive, and I do have to say that Casio seems to have put a lot of effort into that. You can also see here that I have disassembled a small amount of the key bed here. I have taken out the keys in one little section here, and I've also taken out the actual action mechanism itself in that same exact area. Now, I think before I really talk about my opinions and the interesting things I've found regarding these weights and the keys themselves, I do want to actually show you the way the action itself works, at least the best that I can. There is this large plastic frame here that kind of blocks the view of some of the action components, but I will do my best to get the camera in there somehow and show you the way that it works when you actually play the key, because it's kind of interesting to see, and it's really fascinating to see the way that the Casio has simplified the action of a real acoustic piano into just simply 2 levers. It's actually quite fascinating, and so let's take a look at that, and then I'll also show you the interesting things that I have noticed regarding the weights of the black and the white keys and other such things. So let's check that out. So here's that side view I promised you of the action, and as you can see, this white frame here does block a few components of the action, but that's okay. It's a totally necessary component here. So basically, as you can see here, we have the weights down here, and then the keys are up here. The first weight that we have exposed is the weight belonging to this black key. As you can see, when I move this black key, that weight moves. You can see there's 2 levers going on. The key is one lever, and then the actual weight itself is another lever. So it's a really fascinating, simplified version of an action. Very interesting. But the really interesting parts that I want you to notice are 2 things. First of all, if you take a look at the black weight, which I'm wiggling right now, you'll see that you can see a weight behind it. Which weight is that? Well, it's the white key right next to it. And as you can see there, the black weight is actually slightly different sized from the white key. The black weight is actually physically smaller than the weight for the white key. Now, you might think this is some kind of camera angle trick, but I can prove to you that it isn't, because as you can see, right over there at the tip of my finger is another weight. Which weight is that? Well, it's not the next black key, because this is the next black key. So as you can see, the next black weight is hidden behind our first white weight here. So clearly it's smaller. That little thing I pointed to is the next white weight, which is poking out from behind the other white weight. And because it's at a slight diagonal, you can still manage to see it. So as you can see, the black weights of the keys are actually physically smaller than the weights of the white keys. So that is a very interesting thing. Clearly this was done intentionally. And I'll talk more about why it was done intentionally in a little bit here. But the other thing I want you to notice here is that on the black weight itself, as you can see when I move this, the black key moves, it says B1 right about where my finger is, where that little bend of the weight is. Now, if I keep that raised up so you can see the white weight, which I'm now moving right now, it might be difficult to see, but as you can see there, it says W1. And I will show you guys a closer up view of the action weights themselves and get a bit more detail so you can really see that for yourselves. But for now, you just have to trust me that on the
white weight, it literally says W1. So clearly when they're molding and casting these metal weights, there's clearly a difference between the black weights and the white weights. If there was no difference, I don't think they'd have to label black versus white. They'd all be the same for this particular zone of the keybed, and then they just put all the universal weights into that section of the keyboard. But because there's a difference between each individual black and white key, they actually have to label them separately. So that, I think, is something a bit unique. Now let's take a look at the actual weights themselves separated from the keys, so you can see what I'm talking about there in greater detail. So this here is the little section of weights that I have removed from the keys. These here are the keys that they correspond to. As you can see, we've got 3 white keys and 1 black key. The black key, from our perspective, is the second from the right, and that would mean that this weight corresponds to said black key. I also know this because the weight, as a matter of fact, actually says B1 on it. Hopefully you guys can see that. So there's the B1 and then there's the W1 that I mentioned earlier. So clearly the weights are in fact manufactured differently, and you can even see this just from looking at them. There's a few differences you might notice between the black weight here and the other 3 white weights that are surrounding it. First of all, the weight itself is manufactured differently. It's a little bit lighter duty, it's a little bit thinner, and clearly has a bit less metal in it than the other weights. The other thing you might notice is that it appears to physically be smaller, not only in thickness but also in height, and I can prove this by taking this piece of metal, which by the way is actually from the PX-S3000. If I grab this in such a way that it's not changing, it's very hard to hold on to because it's greasy, but if I put this here, you'll see that that black weight is actually a little bit shorter. It doesn't come up as high and doesn't touch the metal perfectly straight bar here like the other 3 white weights do. However, it's not longer on the other side, interestingly enough. If I put all 4 of them here, you'll see that they all pretty much touch the bar. There might be a slight little difference, but there isn't really much. This side of the bar maybe isn't perfectly straight. Let's try this here. As you can see, they're all just about the same length there, but clearly the black weight here on top, the one second from the right, is in fact a different size. The final thing I wanted to mention here that's also a bit interesting is that the weights themselves, the length of the weight is a little bit different. This here is the black weight, and as you can see, it pokes out a little bit longer than the others. Let me grab my makeshift ruler here, and you can clearly see that the black weight is a little bit longer. So clearly they're compensating for the short fulcrum here with the black key, and the fact that you have more leverage with the black key, which makes it lighter to press, and the fact that the weight itself is smaller and lighter makes the black key feel massively lighter than the rest of the keys. So like I promised you, I would also show you the fulcrum of the keys and the way that those are designed, and this is what we're going to be doing here. I've got some grease on my fingers from the action here, so that's why I'll be rubbing my fingers, but I just wanted to show you this here. So basically, a lot of this area in here would be hidden by the case of the instrument, but the fulcrum and the balance point of the key, where it hinges, is actually right back in here. That's where the key itself actually hinges, as you can see. The way to remove the key, by the way, I thought was really ingenious, and I loved the way it's designed. You actually take a pair of pliers, you squeeze the key back here, and then you pull up on it, pull up and out at the same time, and the key just pops right back out, and putting it back in should be an equally easy procedure. I really like that design, and it shows, again, that Casio is paying attention to the way their instruments go together. It would have been really amazing if they'd put that same design into making sure that the action felt as close to even other digital pianos as possible, but unfortunately that didn't happen. So the difference here between the black and the white keys, the Casio's logic behind it, is that if the black keys felt the same weight as the white keys, as you move your finger in towards the back of the black key, it would have a heavier feel, because as you move your fingers in towards the back of the keys, especially with this digital piano, the action gets heavier. Because you're moving your finger closer and closer to that balance point, you have less and less leverage, and it becomes harder and harder to push down the key. Once again, Casio's logic here is that if the black keys and the white keys were the same weight, when you're playing certain chords and certain passages that require your fingers to be farther in on the black keys than on the white keys, it would create a difference of feel. For example, one chord I found, and I'm sure there's many, that has this effect is a F sharp minor 7 chord. For example, you can see there that my second finger is much farther in on the black key than it is with my thumb. Now my other 3 fingers, my middle finger is about the same distance into the white key as this one is, and my pinky is actually out towards the tip of this high E flat. So you can see that as you're playing the instrument, the area in which you play the key varies from finger to finger, which is why on higher end digital pianos, even others of this price point, in fact, to a lesser degree, and also a real acoustic piano, that's why it's really important that the key feels the same across the entire register, or across the entire key. Like I said, other digital pianos do have this effect as well, but many of them are to a bit of a lesser extent than with this instrument. But that is why Casio has made the black keys lighter than the white keys, because this right there is about the sweet spot where the keys will actually feel about the same. I think it's like right around here, so a little bit almost towards halfway in towards the black key is where the black key feels the same as playing the white key up in at the tip. So when you're playing certain chords in certain passages, it actually does balance out, but also, for example, my pinky is out towards the tip of the white key, which means it's feeling a lot lighter than my middle finger is when I'm playing this C. When I push those both at the same time, with my fingers being in that same positioning, as they would be for the F minor 7 chord, the black key wants to depress way easier than that white key. So there is really no easy fix for the fulcrum getting heavier, or the keys getting heavier as you move in towards the fulcrum, but that was Casio's attempt at fixing it. So I just find that that's a very, very interesting thing, and that's just their logic behind how to fix the problem. To be honest, there is no real one easy fix to solve this issue, because no matter how you approach it, there is going to be some kind of a flaw. If you try to address the fact that the keys get heavier towards the back of the key, you then end up with a whole rank of keys that is lighter than the other. If you address the issue that a whole rank of keys is lighter than the other, you then end up with what is most likely going to be an action that under certain circumstances would be very frustrating to play as well. So either way, you end up with, well, an action that's not super accurate to even the feel of other digital pianos. So I think with this design action, this super compact, slim action, I don't think there is one easy fix. I think the best solution to create a better digital piano action, while I'm not an engineer, I do think the better solution would be to create a digital piano action, just focus on the action alone, and work on creating a digital piano action that feels as good as you possibly can. Then design a case for the actual digital piano, for the control panels and all the electronics, to go around that action rather than the other way around. I am aware that there are some people who are looking for a slim form factor digital piano, but I think that's could be a minority of the market. I think many more people would prefer to have a slightly bulkier but more realistic digital piano than a very slim but unrealistic feeling digital piano. That's just my personal preference, and I think it resonates with many of the other people in the digital piano community. There are always outliers, but I think that might be the best solution there.
So that has been the conclusion for the Casio PX-S3000 disassembly and analysis video. I really hope that you guys have enjoyed it, and for those of you who have stuck around all the way to the end of this video, I thought I'd talk a little bit more about, form follows function and what that means to me. This term form follows function is often accredited to the famous architect Frank Lloyd Wright, but in fact it was actually his boss, Mr. Sullivan, who actually coined the phrase. Frank Lloyd Wright actually kind of had a few different philosophies as to what form follows function meant, but for his boss, Mr. Sullivan, who was one of the first, if not the first person to design and build skyscrapers, Mr. Sullivan felt that the inside of the building should be the function. The function of the building should be the priority, and then you would then build the exterior of the building afterwards. So the form of the building would follow the function. You design the building with a purpose in mind, and then afterwards you build the shape of the building. And that's kind of the same basic approach I had with the Casio PX-S3000, and it's kind of the same philosophy I have with digital pianos as a whole. The function of that instrument is to be a good practice instrument that will replicate the functionality of a piano in some way. Obviously, a digital piano, even the better ones like the ES-110 up here, doesn't come perfectly to the feel of a real acoustic piano, but the function of the ES-110, in my opinion, comes a lot closer to the goal of a real piano than the Casio PX-S3000. So the form follows function, meaning the function of the digital piano should be a good playing action, and then the form of it, the appearance of it, and the layout of it would follow suit afterwards. And that, I think, is, again, I mentioned the ES-110 and also the P125, they're both here. Many people, I think, might dispute whether or not these look better or not as nice as the PX-S3000. They're not as slim, they're not as modern, but honestly, for the performance boost you get with the ES110 and the P125 regarding the action, they're not terribly clunky either. They are a bit taller than the PX-S3000, but front to back, they're very, very close, at least in my opinion. They still are very slim instruments, so I think that is also something kind of interesting to note here, that while the action of this is really fantastic and the action of this is also very nice, they're not super bulky either. So I just find that kind of interesting as well, where it is possible to get a rather slim digital piano that feels quite nice. But once again, I just wanted to touch there on the form follows function thing and kind of my logic of it, because there are a few philosophies regarding that saying, form follows function. I do hope that you guys have enjoyed this video regarding the PX-S3000. If you're curious why it's not here up on the stand at the moment, no, it hasn't broken yet. I just wanted to do another video here regarding these two instruments, so I figured I'd do that now before I put away the PX-S3000 and put it all back together. Like I've said at the beginning of this video, the assembly and the disassembly of the PX-S3000 is genuinely impressive. Other digital pianos of that same price point and also a little bit cheaper don't come apart and especially go back together in the same way that the PX-S3000 does. There's actually been a lot of really nice attention to detail on the inside regarding the way cables go together and regarding the way things come apart, and it's actually very well done. So I definitely think that Casio, while at least with the PX-S3000, they're not a force to be reckoned with in this price point, I think if they especially focus on the action and really making them extremely playable for pianists, I think in the future Casio will really be a force to be reckoned with, and I think in the future they will certainly come out with some really, really classy instruments. So I'm looking forward to that day when Casio comes out with some really, really great, cool instruments for me to review sometime later in the future that I can go buy. But in the meantime, this has been the review of the PX-S3000. Everything I mentioned in this video also applies to the 1000. They use the exact same action, and other than a few menu and sound differences, they are exactly the same. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed this video, and if you did, you might want to go check out my channel. If you do that, you'll find a whole bunch of videos of acoustic pianos, digital pianos, organs, keyboards, and all kinds of cool stuff. So if any of that sounds cool, you might want to think about subscribing. And if you do subscribe, thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.